give us about half an hour before we open up to questions. So over to you, Randall.
Thank you very much, Tisha, and to Melissa, I think, who's trying to tap in there. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. First off, as Alicia mentioned, I'm a bit diverse in my background. I think it's important in American politics. It's always a matter of perspective. Everyone has an opinion about American politics, and everyone is slightly different. From my perspective, being a Canadian to begin with, a near neighbor, physically close to America, as most Canadians are, but we're in a unique position, especially back when I lived there, where I was able to watch unfiltered US news on television. It's also before CNN and all these things. So we didn't have the BBC telling us what was going on in America. We could watch it for ourselves with a number of channels. So it's a rather unique view we had. And then for over 20 years, I was inside of America in the public sector and the private sector. In the public sector, working for an elected official, which is now deep in Trump country. In fact, it was one of only 2 states in the United States that Trump won every single county in the state, that in West Virginia. So it was deeply red. And then I've lived in the UK for over 10 years, was here in the late 80s, early 90s, and back in 2014. So I have also the British perspective. My fourth perspective, which doesn't belong to a passport, is really my PhD at Cambridge was as an historian. I do take a longer view of these things, and there may not be issues that are kind of up to the second that I'm going to have an opinion on, but the longer view, and I think especially in regard to the Democratic Party and Republican parties, I think is essential at this point. So we'll look in 3 different areas. One, take a quick look at the campaigns. The 2016 campaign, how Trump won, which most people are familiar with, and how that differs from 2020 in the likelihood that I might be able to pull it off this time again. The second section, I think we'll look at the what I call the American gerontocracy, which I think is a crisis in leadership in both the Republican and the Democratic Party, that we've essentially had a very narrow demographic group born in the 1940s who have run and still run American politics and have for the last 30 years, which is an unusual event, and I think not a good one in terms of refreshing the leadership and refreshing policy. And the last little section I'll do will be about the importance of 2024, which I think will probably be the most important US election in a generation. And this one, we may not look back on 2020 as any kind of a milestone or a change. 2024 may be the big one. So if we take a quick look here at the 2016, how Trump won in 2016. Familiar to you all, Trump is the outsider, the businessman, a populist. People like to put tags on Trump and what kind of politician. I rather favor the idea that he's really a Latin American Cadillo, you know, a populist, the strong man out there. I think he'd be probably more happy in Argentina running politics than America, but there you go. People knew about him superficially, but not deeply, and in the end were willing to take the risk of voting for him against Hillary Clinton, was a highly polarizing figure. I don't think in Britain, not having, spent a lot of time in America, you realize how polarizing Hillary Clinton was. 60% of those people who disliked both candidates in 2016 voted for Trump. She was a poor campaigner. She had the lead, the money, and the backing of the Democratic Party establishment, both in 2008 and 2016, and she lost both times. And I think at its core, people didn't trust her. But away from the personalities, I think the important thing with 2016, and it reflects a longer trend in American politics, is the Democrats were moving away from traditional working class issues, which truly helped Trump win. Over the past couple of decades, Democrats have been moving incrementally into a party of groups: visible minority, pro-immigration, socially liberal, gender issues, drifting to the left, but really dealing with people in as groups. And at one level, the Democrats are very accurately assessing the changing demographics in America. In 1960, U.S. voting population was 87% white. In 2020, it's 67. Trump won the same percentage of the white vote in 2016 as Romney won in 2012 and Ronald Reagan in 1980. So the problem with the Republicans is that their natural base is getting smaller and smaller. They're still winning the same percentage, but that is getting them less and less in terms of votes. 94% of new eligible voters who have registered in the US since 2016 have been minorities. That's the magnitude of the problem for the Republican Party. For the Democrats, you've got to a situation where they're moving in this direction of identity politics. And it became an uncomfortable place for traditional white working class, what Americans would call blue collar voters, especially male, especially social conservatives, who felt they were being left out, not listened to. Trump spoke directly to them. And he spoke to them in a number of areas that, and if you're looking at one of the great mistakes of Hillary Clinton was the firewall strategy, as many of you would know, that there were certain states that had always voted Democrat: Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, which was her firewall. And she didn't have to worry about that because Trump was not going to win those areas. But that have a lot of working class voters. And I know there was a lot of controversy about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and data and all this stuff. One thing that Cambridge Analytica did for the Republican Party, which was very simple, they came in, looked at the internal polling, looked at the publicly available polling, and pointed out to the Trump campaign that they were much closer in these firewall states than most of the public believed. And also that Clinton simply wasn't campaigning there. And they shifted about $50 million in advertising money into those areas. And that's how Trump won the election. He won all 4 of those states. He picked up 75 electoral college votes, and his widest margin of victory there was 1.3%. The other big split in this kind of balkanization of America is between city and countryside. And the key area for the last election and this election is actually the interplay between those, the suburbs around large cities, which are predominantly but not totally white, tend to be middle class. He won against Hillary by a margin of 10% in the suburbs. And that's really how he won. It was Democratic, old working class voters, and swinging the suburban vote in his favor. Now, why do I think, in all likelihood, Trump is going to lose in November, but I think it's going to be much closer than people think. I think we've reached peak Biden right now, and he's got a lot of difficult decisions to make between now and November. People know more about Trump, obviously, than they did 4 years ago, and a lot of people don't like him and don't like how he governs. And 62% of those who plan to vote for Biden say they are voting specifically against Trump. 12% of Republicans say they're specifically voting against Biden. So Biden, is doing well largely because he doesn't scare the horses. Trump has lost support in the suburbs. He trails Biden by 9% across the United States in the suburbs, especially females. And it's the reason why the Republicans lost 40 seats in the 2018 congressional elections, was they lost the suburbs. Trump has also been unlucky. There's the old phrase from Napoleon, give me lucky generals. He wasn't lucky. His time, COVID hits. In the first 3 years of his presidency, the economy was his strong card. GDP was growing faster than during Obama's second term, and it looked like he was on the road to re-election. COVID hits, and the economy is shattered. Although he is gotten good marks in the United States for the way that he's responded economically, working with Congress in trying to put the American economy back on track. The Democrats have already started ads attacking him on the economy, but I think it's a foolish ploy because he's actually done quite well. Obviously, on the medical side, his handling of COVID, as we all know, has not been universally kind of supported in the United States, and that's certainly a weak point for him. He's behind nationally by about 10%, but more importantly, he's behind in several key states that gave him his margin of victory: Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, those types, but also states where it shouldn't even be close: Texas, Arizona, and Florida. All of those states are recent COVID outbreak states. So he's, he has little margin for error because he won by such a close margin last time, but he's also fighting some backfires of places that he thought he was pretty comfortable. But how can Trump close the gap and even perhaps win? Mark this in your calendars. October the 29th, the Department of Commerce releases its third quarter GDP preliminary results. My hand on heart. It will, because it's operating from a low base, we're going to see probably a 20% plus jump in US GDP in the third quarter. Trump will declare victory, at the economic victory at that point. The big thing is it will be too late for postal votes, which is a side issue in this campaign. Is because of COVID, the number of votes that'll end up being postal votes. Trump will argue that in the campaign everything was fine until the China virus arrived, and they could have stopped it. Blah. We all know the narrative, but they will get the GDP numbers before the election, and that may help him very much. Obviously, the other big thing for Trump, he needs the economy to turn around. He needs a vaccine or a comprehensive treatment. It just needs to be nearing production. It doesn't have to be on the shelf. So these are the two in the big picture. If we get a vaccine and if the economy turns around, he's in much better position, especially if Biden is not particularly running well. The other sidebar historically is that Americans have tended to re-elect presidents. 8 of the last 10 American presidents have been re-elected, 15 out of 19 in the last 120 years. Take that for what you think it might be worth. Other Trump themes in the campaign will bang away at China on trade. This is targeting, obviously, blue-collar voters. He's tough on trade. Biden won't be. And there's a lot of bipartisan support in especially the Senate for being tough on China on trade. He'll obviously go after what he calls Sleepy Joe, who's too weak, too old, and a Trojan horse for the left wing of the Democratic Party. One thing that may happen that might surprise people, it's entirely possible that Trump could decide to shake up the race, dump Mike Pence as vice president, and run with someone else, possibly a woman, just to shake things up, and also someone to blame if it goes wrong. It would not be out of character, but he's a complicated man. Another issue right now is the polls have him at down about 10%. I don't believe the polls are as accurate as that. The level of debate, talking with my American friends, the polarization of debate in America is extreme, especially after the Black Lives Matter campaign. Self-censorship is rife. And I'm not sure if people are telling the pollsters everything rather than just having no comment. Deep down inside, and I think especially you're looking at, again, suburban America, Americans don't think that they are institutionally racist or that the United States should rewrite the Constitution or tear down statues of the founding fathers just because of the protest movement. Reform the police, yes, but don't defund them. Now, it's not what people tell or don't tell pollsters that matter. It's what they do in the privacy of the polling booth. Nixon's silent majority. So I think that lead is a lot softer, simply on a numerical basis, than it might appear at the start. And another thing about, again, my experience in a long time in America, race relations in America are much better than you think they are. If you get down to an individual level or working in an office, you know, everyone has black friends. You walk through, I commuted through Grand Central Station for 17 years. You see blacks and whites hugging each other. They're friends, they see each other. It's when we retreat into political groups that the antagonism begins. So you have the contrast where individually, most Americans get along splendidly well with people of all races. When we get them into groups, that's when the friction begins. Joe Biden. What's his advantages coming in this election? He's not Trump. He doesn't, as I said, he doesn't scare the horses. There are a few negatives apart from being a bit boring. He's seen as the continuity Obama-Clinton candidate, which is attractive to many Americans. And I think in terms of, as Alicia mentioned with foreign policy, much more likely to be back to what we had from the Obama and Clinton administrations who were engaged internationally. So from that level, a Biden victory would be a reversion back, something much closer to Obama, especially if Rice is nominated as vice president, the former national security advisor. She may get a position in the administration anyway, and she'd be a traditionalist in that sense. One of the advantages Biden had, he's seen as traditionally remember he ran for president 32 years ago. Very positive with blue collar workers. They like him. Blacks, women, although there have been some sexual harassment allegations against Biden kind of deep in the past. So he's seen from the Democratic Party as a counter to Trump, and this attraction to blue collar workers is an important part of it. Challenges for Joe Biden. He is the oldest presidential candidate in US history. He'll be 78 years old when he's sworn in. He'll be the oldest president ever. Will be older than Reagan when Reagan stepped down after 2 terms in 1989. His other big challenge, the vice presidential, and we can talk more about this perhaps in the Q&As. Given Biden's age, everyone must be president ready on day one. And everyone in the short list has political baggage. Kamala Harris, who's the highest profile one, didn't do well with black voters, or in fact, any voters, when she ran for the nomination, dropped out of the race very, very early. She was attorney general, basically a prosecutor in California, which is not very Black Lives Matter friendly. She's not a traditional African American. Her father was Jamaican, taught economics at Stanford University. Her mother is a Tamil, who's a cancer science researcher. So she doesn't fit the mold. Susan Rice, as I mentioned, no electoral experience. The Benghazi affair, where she was, I'll get into the deep details, but there were times when she was saying things to the press which turned out to be untrue. These were things which she had been told, so it wasn't her lying. But anyway, we get back to Benghazi. It brings Hillary Clinton back into the conversation. If Biden went with her, it would be much more like a Dick Cheney type of appointment, where this is someone to help the administration, not necessarily someone who would be kind of going on to be president next time around. Other people in there, like Karen Bass, who looked like a front runner a few weeks ago, blew up pretty badly in terms of things she said about Castro, Scientology, all sorts of things. So it's a tough choice for Biden. Everyone's got baggage, and he's going to catch flack regardless. And again, Biden's another big challenge for Biden. He can't hide in the basement. That's been the big